Good day YouTube, this is Max from MB Developments and welcome to my channel. So today I'm going to show you guys how to install Ubuntu server in VirtualBox or using VirtualBox. First a bit about VirtualBox. VirtualBox is simply a piece of software that enables you to run operating systems in a virtual environment. This comes in very handy when you want to test or would like to test virtual operating systems, and can also come in handy and testing new software and new hardware before you actually implement it. So to get VirtualBox, you can just go to virtualbox.org/wiki/download. I will put the links in the description and you guys can download a copy from there. I downloaded Windows host, so I downloaded Windows host due to the fact that I'm running Windows 7. The second thing that you will also need obviously is a copy of Ubuntu server. So you guys can go to the ubuntu.com website, that is ubuntu.com. I will also put the link in the description. .com/download/server. When you go to the page, you will see Ubuntu server LTS and then the latest version. When you are new to Linux, and I always say this to the guys, always go with the LTS version. This simple reason for it being that Ubuntu server LTS is long-term support. It is usually up to 5 years, if I remember correctly, that specific version is supported. And then you have got the latest version, but that can be buggy. So I suggest always go for the LTS version. In this case, it's the Ubuntu Server 1604.2 LTS, and grab yourself a copy of that. Once you have got those two, run through the installation process for your virtual machine, and when you double click on your icon, you will end up with a user interface similar to this, except for these two, as these two have been set up prior. So in order to prepare our VirtualBox manager, I'm going to go click on new, and we are going to create a new virtual machine for our Ubuntu server. So Ubuntu server, I'm just calling it that. You can call it whatever you want to. That is just an identifier for your virtual machine and obviously for VirtualBox Manager. Type is Linux and you leave it as your version as Ubuntu. It should always default to this, but just check on that. I'm just going to push up the RAM here to 2 gig. Obviously, you can decide how much RAM and or how much RAM you have available and how much you want to allocate. I will also be creating a virtual hard disk now. Great. I'm going to leave it at the default. That's always good to leave it where it is. The file size, I'm just going to drop it down to 5 gigs for now, simply for the sake of time, as the bigger this is, the longer it's going to take to create. The hard disk file type, I will be leaving this as VirtualBox disk image, and I'm going to create this as a fixed size. You can leave it as dynamically allocated. I just prefer that I know, okay, I have allocated 5 gigs. Okay, hit create. This is going to take a couple of seconds to create. I'm doing it quite small, but as I said before, the smaller you make it, the faster it will take to create. But if you do have time, and obviously if you do have the hard drive space, do leave it at 10 gigs. If you are planning to like build out on it and actually actively use it, obviously use as much space as possible. So we are standing at 90%, and it is done. So now we have just given it the identifier, and it automatically assigns a couple of settings, and it has created the virtual drive. But I wish to change a few settings. So I'm going to go right click, settings. You guys are more than welcome to play around with your settings here a bit. I'm not going to go through all of them, as it is very straightforward. Your system, you can obviously change your memory a bit. I'm just going to tick off the floppy. I don't need it. I'm going to leave optical and leave hard drive. Those two are important. You guys can go read up on the internet what's that all about. Processor, if you have a multi processor CPU, then you guys can push it up. I just give it to, just gives it a bit more, or it just runs a little bit better. That you guys can leave. Display, as for now, it is just going to be server. So I'm just going to leave my video memory at 16 meg for now, and I'm just going to leave monitor count 1. Storage, important. Reason for this being is, as you guys can see, it has created the Ubuntu server.vdi, which is the virtual hard drive we've created. However, we want to mount the ISO that you downloaded. In other words, the file that you've downloaded, we want to mount it as a virtual optical disk file. Just click on it. I've just placed mine on the desktop. It will say Ubuntu server 1604, and it's a 64-bit version. Open. Then we move on to audio that you can leave, and under network, this is rather important if you are planning to use this virtual machine, and I want to say in brackets, like in a production environment almost, but it also eliminates a few issues which I will briefly explain later. And what you guys should do is just change this to bridged adapter, and you can leave that as default. Actually, I'm going to explain to you guys now what the issue here is. What I found when setting up the Ubuntu server, if you just leave it as at NAT, then it assigns an IP address or in Linux itself, and then that is different from the IP address of the network that you're on. In simple terms, it merely means that there is no way for you to access that virtual drive over the network, or that virtual machine over the network. However, if you do change it to bridged adapter, then Ubuntu server, the IP address that it assigns, will assign it in the same range as your network. So change this over to bridged adapter, and that you guys can leave default. So this is very important. It just eliminates a lot of problems. As per example, which I will show you guys later, as well, is to just quickly check if your Ubuntu server is properly up and running, and just to check your Apache to see if your Apache is running, that being your web development server. Okay, so that is the reason for that, and that is probably the most important, or that is the most important setting right over there. So do change that. Once you've done that, the rest you can all use default, or you can make more changes, but this one is absolutely essential for your Ubuntu server to run out of the box properly in terms of networking. Click OK. That's all set up. We've now mounted our Ubuntu disk, our ISO for installation, and we've got our drive ready. We've got all our settings ready. It is highlighted, and we just hit start. And magic. There we go. Now, one thing I'm going to show you guys that comes in handy. This screen is rather small to work like that. So all I'm going to do is, with the top settings here, you can go view. There's some different settings. Now for this, I'm going to use scaled mode. You're going to get a little message that pops up. Please do read it. It is quite important. You can just hit switch, and I am actually able to physically scale this window bigger. If I didn't do that, if I used one of the other methods, then it would go bigger, however, that the actual screen real estate would stay the same size. So this way I can just see what's happening much bigger. And you guys can probably then see this better as well. So what have we got here? It just asks you the language. You guys can choose your language. As you guys can see, Ubuntu takes enormous care and in making it as localizing it as much as possible. So in my case, I am just going to choose English. Now here we have a few options. So this is your first screen pretty much that you will see after you've chosen your language, and you have got some options. I'm not going to go through everything, I'm just quickly going to touch on each one of them. I'm going to skip that one for now. Install Ubuntu server with HWE kernel. Now, I do not suggest using this, especially if you're a noob. Especially if you are new to Linux and you are not sure exactly what it does. But what it simply does, this is merely the latest Ubuntu kernel that has got to do with hardware. In other words, it is designed to work with the latest hardware out there, be it graphics card, be it whatever technology. The problem with it, it is not always stable. It is not always the best route to go, especially if you are a newbie. Do not go for this. Install MAAS region controller and MAAS rack controller. This to me as well is pretty new. I have not had time to go into it, but all I'm going to say about this is called Metal as Service. It creates a sort of cloud node uh, using your hardware. Like you would see on the big players on like Google Cloud and that. Very interesting. As I said, I have not personally had the time to go into this. Really, actually, I really do, and hopefully I can do a tutorial on this as well. But what we are going to focus on is simply install Ubuntu server. The other two is just if you want to check those two, let me just mention them, or those actually all of them. Just check the disk for defects. That's pretty straightforward. Test your memory, pretty straightforward. Boot from the hard disk, again straightforward, and to rescue a broken system. But we're just interested in install Ubuntu server. Read enter. And it is going to spin up for a bit, and it will bring you to the language selection. So now we're actually getting to installing the actual Ubuntu server. So I'm just going to choose English. Again, there is a whole list of countries and of languages for localization. I am just going to stick with English. Your location. I am South African. I'm born and raised. Now this is an interesting one. Do you want it to detect your keyboard layout? Most people always jump to yes immediately. No, you do not want to do it. It is a tedious process. Just select no. If you guys really want to have the time and really want to do it, go to yes. But I suggest just go to no. And from here, choose your keyboard configuration. As chances is pretty good it's going to have your country in that list. Mine very simple, English South Africa. And it's going to do its thing for now. Loading up a couple of modules. It usually doesn't take very long. So just bear with it for a little bit. It's just loading some components. And yes, pretty much what it's doing here is checking that ISO and dropping the components in memory so that it can actually work with it. It just makes it fast to work with. So it's at this point it's not actually installing anything as of yet. Send. And it will do some more hardware detecting. Now it's looking for your network card. Now, like I said, this setup normally doesn't take long. It really depends on the strength of your system, on how much RAM you've allocated, you know, how much resource you're giving it, and there we pretty much go in terms of loading some resources. This is pretty much just very much like the prerequisites or the pre-runs that Windows does when it installs. So here it simply asks us, okay, what should the host name be? What should this virtual machine be known on the network? I am just going to call it Ubuntu server. Come now. Ubuntu server. If you hit the tab button, you can actually continue. Full name for the new user. I am just going to go with Max. Hit continue. Username for your account. It's going to leave that as Max. Hit continue. The password, I'm just going to call it a default. I'm going to call it Max. Doesn't really matter in my case. And you can even show it in clear. Just make a note of that password. That's very important. It is an absolute pain to try to get back into your computer in Linux if you do not have your password. Believe me, it's extremely difficult, as Linux is one of the most secure operating systems there is. Continue. Verifying with Max. Continue. And usually at this point, it will ask you, well, for you guys, most it will just go through. If you don't, it's going to say to you, listen, you've got less than 8 characters. Are you sure you want to use a weak password? I'm just going to go with yes. Next screen, very important in terms of server. Do you wish to encrypt your home directory? Now, for a server, from the bat, no. You do not want to encrypt that home folder. It becomes quite an issue where certain settings and certain files and certain configuration files even end up in your home folder or in your home directory where Linux just simply can't read it. It doesn't have access to it, and it causes all bunch of, or it could potentially cause a bunch of issues. This is, however, useful when you're running something like Ubuntu desktop and you're running it on a laptop. That's just to make sure if something happens that people can't just access your information, even though you might have a password on your laptop, but there is a way to bypass that. Now, this just simply ensures that you do not have access to that information. But as this is a server, which is most likely, you know, in-house, or in this case, it's an actual virtual machine. If you were running this in a production environment, which the process is pretty much the same as I'm doing for virtual machine, you can use this exact method to install an actual server. And as well, do not use encryption. So I'm definitely going to choose that no. Just checking the time, syncing all of that. That's another thing about Linux. Linux has evolved quite far in being able to configure most of the things. Based on your present physical location, yes, we are in Africa. Joburg, yes. And it will do a couple of things, do its thing, as I always say. Let it do its thing, and it's starting up the partitioner, and here it asks us to partition the disk. We've got 2 methods here, guided, or 3, 4 methods to be exact. but two of them is pretty much the same. You can use guided, use entire disk, guided, use entire disk and set up LVM, and encrypted LVM or manual. Stay away from manual, it is unnecessary. If you really want to learn how to partition disks, especially in Linux, there's a lot of tutorials out there. Check it out. I might do one in the future, but it can become quite tricky and quite complex depending on what you want to do. LVM and encrypted LVM, encrypted obviously just being LVM encrypted. LVM stands for Large Volume Manager. Now this is useful when you are running multiple hard drives in the same big server, and you can create partitions dynamically and things like that. So it is very useful. However, for a virtual machine, it is, I wouldn't say it's useful at all. Especially if you specifically need to experiment or learn LVM, then I suggest just go with guided use entire disk. And what this will do, it will ask you, can it use the current hard drive? Yes, it can. It is the ATA VirtualBox hard disk that we set up for it. So that is the correct drive for the partition. And it will ask you, must it write the information to the partition? And what it will be doing, it will be creating several partitions, a swap partition, an extension for partition, and if I'm not mistaken, it creates another partition, but it will create it from this main drive that you have given it. Again, if you guys want to learn more about specifically how partitions work, go check it out on the internet. It is interesting, but it is a lot of work. It's a lot of read up. So just go with the default. It works. Linux and well is brilliant at figuring these things out for itself. So let's just write the changes to disk. This will start the process of starting to install some files, creating the partitions, and this takes a couple of minutes. So I'm just going to pause the vid and be right back. If your installation continued successfully, you should now get to the HTTP proxy access if you do use it. This is your HTTP proxy information. If you use it, I know that most of you don't. This is in very specific environments where this is used. So due to the fact that you guys don't really need it or not really going to use it, you can just hit tab, leave it blank, and continue. Now when I hit continue, this is going to install another couple of files, going to download a few more files. So I am just going to pause the video till the next stage. After a few minutes, your installation should be where mine is at now. And it's asking you, should it enable and manage automatic updates? I, by default, always say yes. Even if you are running a VM, always keep your security updates to the latest, especially when you are testing, as you will be testing a lot of software, that type of stuff, and you can immediately see if there is problems with the latest security updates. So yes, do always leave them on. So I'm going to leave that on, and it will install a bit of software, nothing too major, and it will bring us to the software selection screen. Now here you can choose what software to install. I found that manual pack selection hasn't really worked for me, so I don't normally bother with it. I do not use DNS server. I do, however, use LAMP server. Just a quick summary on what LAMP is. LAMP is a local web development server or local web development environment that has got PHP, that runs Apache, MySQL databases, and so forth. It is very handy. So by default, I always install that, as I am by nature a web developer. and I found that to be useful. So suggest just adding LAMP, and for those of you that wonder, I will most likely in the future do a separate installation and do a separate installation of LAMP, installing it manually instead of this method. I do not use mail server. I do not use SQL database. Samba, I've also found, does not always work for me out the box when I install it through years. So I normally install that separately, which will be a separate video. The standard system utilities already ticked, and open SSH server. I am going to select that as well. Just worth a mention, the way that you do select these is with the spacebar. If you want to deselect, you can hit spacebar again and it will deselect it. The reason why I used open or selected open SSH server is simply this enables me to connect to the server remotely. I do not want to get into details too much, but it also very useful when you run a production server, is to have OpenSSH server installed. Go read up on OpenSSH server specifically to see what that is all about. All I'm going to mention here that it is very useful, so I always install it, as sometimes I do run a VM, or even on my live local servers that I run, I connect remotely. So OpenSSH is an essential part of enabling me to do that. Great. Just hit the tab, continue, hit enter, and it will retrieve another couple of files, and it's going to bring us to another screen. Now this screen is, well, actually relates to the MySQL server. Due to the fact that we did select LAMP server to install, it is going to install MySQL server. And in order for it to work properly, all that it wants from you is that you need to supply a MySQL root password. If you guys haven't worked at this before, don't worry about it too much now. Just give it a proper password, but do remember it. I am just going to call mine TOOR. Hit tab. It's just root backwards. Show password clear, and I'm going to tab again and continue. It's asking me please to repeat it. There we go, continue. And it will now continue installing all the software, all the modules, everything that was selected. If in your case the manual selection did work, it will also install that now. Now this is not a long process. It does take a few minutes, but again, in the sake of saving some time and saving some video footage, I'm just going to pause and I will be back in the next stage. And we are back in action. My installation took about 5 minutes to get to this point, and it installed some software, and it installs the first of the Grub Bootloader. Now the Grub Bootloader simply is your boot partition. This bootloader just enables Linux to boot up. So what it's doing here, it's asking you to confirm that you wish to install the Grub Bootloader to the master boot record. Now, because you're running a virtual machine and you've obviously assigned only one hard drive and so forth as, you know, the major hard drive from that, you can just go ahead and click yes. If you're in a production server and there's more drives involved and stuff like that, make sure of what you're doing. This is what's always good to learn and study in a virtual machine. So we should be good. We can just hit yes. It will install the Grub Bootloader. This doesn't take long, and it is now doing some final settings and installation. This normally doesn't take very long, so I'm just going to leave it, that it's do its thing for a bit there. and it has finished your Linux installation. So if everything has gone well, you should be up to this point now. It's asking you to remove the disks. With Linux and with VM, it normally removes the disks automatically once installation is complete, but you can go to your settings of that specific server. You can go to storage, and as you will see, it does show empty. If it's not empty, then you can obviously just click on it. Just gonna select it again, remove disk from virtual drive. That it's empty, but we know that it is empty, so that is 100%, and we can hit continue. Now it's unloading everything from memory. It is sending the request, and it is now doing a reboot. It was a bit fast there, but that was just ask me, do I just want to do a normal boot up or go into the advanced settings? But I think it automatically selects Ubuntu the first time that it can do a first, run through and get everything in order. That's looking good. Our Linux is actually busy booting up. If you want to, you can pause and go read all of that, but that is pretty much as with Windows. We normally have got that nice little Windows screen, booting up. This is the Linux version. It actually just shows you what is happening each step, everything that is booting up. And as you do not have a GUI, it will not show anything. Great, and there you go, folks. Right at the top, you have Ubuntu 16.04.2 LTS version, so you know immediately when your Linux server is booted up which version you are running, and is asking for a login. If you guys can remember earlier, I made a username of Max and a password of Max, and you will get some information on screen. Welcome to Ubuntu, where you guys can check out Ubuntu management in terms of landscape that I said I'm not going to support. You can see how many packages can be updated and all of that. So I'm just going to give you guys one more tip, or actually two more things that I want to show you guys. The first one being, because you are a normal user, so anything that you do always needs to be preceded by sudo. That means super user do. If you read the last line as well, and when you do something, I'm just going to take an example for now. I'm going to say nano. Now nano, I'm not going to get into that, but nano is the built-in, or is a built-in text editor for Linux, for the command line. And going to then say just edit the file called text.txt, and immediately it will ask you for a password. So you need to type in your password in order to allow you to perform certain functions. In this case, I just called up, just created a text file. I'm just going to kill it. The one other thing that I do want to show you guys is just how to check your IP address. Very simple to do at the command prompt. For this, you do not need to do sudo. You can, but it's not necessity. But for most things, use sudo. But I'm not going to in this case, just to show you guys that it does still work in certain situations. ifconfig, I type that, and that will show me the IP address. When you look on the screen, you will have an ENP0S3. Now that refers to your LAN card, connected LAN card, and where you guys see inet address 10.0.0.161, that is your IP address. That will be assigned dynamically each time that you start up your VM. So you guys will, in most situations, you guys will most likely want to come here and check that IP address. I will, however, do a short little video on how to make that static, that always stays the same. Now, the reason why you want to know this is we just quickly want to check if Apache is running. Now, if I remember correctly, I can just type Apache 2-v. Now Apache, I'm not going to go into it too much, but it is part of the LAMP server that I spoke about earlier, and that is pretty much the core in order for you to run, amongst other things, PHP and the databases and so forth. But this for me is just to check, if Apache is running. So I'm going to type Apache 2 and which version. We're getting Apache 2.4.1 for Ubuntu, and just for the heck of it, I am going to check which Perl version I am running, and I am running Perl version 5. So that is a very good indication that you've actually set up your Linux server 100%, as you will have an IP address that's available to you that you can see that it's the same as your network. You can, in this case, see your Apache. Remember, if you didn't choose LAMP server, then you will not be able to do that Apache test. But for me, that's just a quick little test. And also, just for the heck of it, I am going to go to my browser because I've installed the LAMP server. And I do know what that IP address is, 10.0.0.161. I'm going to open up a new tab and I'm going to go 10.0.0.161. And if my theory is correct, I will actually be able to go to the Apache 2 on Ubuntu VM. So you are actually able to access from Windows. This is Windows. From Windows, in my Windows browser, I have just gone to my browser, I gave it that IP address, and I just to see if I can actually access the server. That opens up a whole new range of possibilities where you can actually use your Ubuntu Linux server as a web development environment, and accessing the pages and so forth through your browser. And once you have done that, and once you check that, and you've had a look to see that everything is running, and you are good to go. One final tip, which is also my final tip for the episode, and for how to install Ubuntu server in a VM on Windows 7, is how to shut down your VM, or how to actually shut down your Linux server. So if it was a production server, you could shut it down like this. If it's your VM, don't just scale it like you would do a normal Windows app. It just causes problems for your virtual drive and stuff like that. So the proper way to do it is just to type shutdown space dash dash space now. If you just type in shutdown, you will get a list of commands of other methods that you can shut down. You can shut it down with timers, like give it 10 seconds or 30 seconds and stuff like that. But for this, you can just immediately shut down and hit enter. And it will run through its processes. It will shut down. We can close that as we are completed with that. And you can see your Ubuntu server is properly shut down and you can close it. Guys, thank you very much for joining me. This is Max signing off.